There's some good news this morning that could help close the racial gap in healthcare. BNC's Jamise Price reports there's been a boost in black student enrollment at med schools across the country.
Medical schools made changes to their admission process, waiving application fees and interviewing candidates remotely. Some of these factors were a benefit for black applicants. More black students are enrolling in medical school, making this year's class more diverse than any before it. This year, more than 2,100 black students started their med school journey. 3 years ago, that number was just over 1,500. Admission counselors can't pinpoint only one factor for the increase. Instead, it has been a combination of factors, from the pandemic to social justice issues that were brought to the forefront in 2020.
I just believe that it was just a perfect storm of everything happening at once, as far as you had this horrendous pandemic that came through that affected the Black community and underrepresented medicine communities more than other communities. And so you had this almost this calling of like, all right, I want to be the catalyst of change, and I want to be able to affect change where I can see it the most in my community.
Tulane University Medical School in New Orleans experienced a 10% increase in enrollment in black students. LSU Health New Orleans School of Medicine also saw a double-digit jump of African American students.
I've always wanted to be a physician. I don't think there's any better way to serve the people you care about or your community than trying to treat their health and trying to extend their lives and give them a better quality of living. But growing up, there seemed to be a lack of physicians who looked like myself.
First-year student Jonathan Leger says it was a welcome surprise to see other students who looked like him.
I was very pleased to see that, and see that especially in New Orleans, where the majority of the population that the physicians will be treating are African American, that the physicians that they're training were more representative of the city's population.
Enrollment is increasing, but paying for tuition remains a challenge. According to the Education Data Initiative, 50% of black medical school graduates are more than $200,000 in debt. African American med students owe more on average than their peers of any other race or ethnicity.
We do lose a lot of students that get accepted, and I wish would come here, but the price is a main factor.
Students say making financial opportunities readily available could alleviate some of the stress and strain they experience during med school. In New Orleans, I'm Jamise Price for BNC.
Now imagine those students wanted to go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Purdue. The Supreme Court once again set to revisit the question of affirmative action in higher education. It will hear cases challenging the use of race as one factor in admissions at Harvard and also at the University of North Carolina, UNC. Jesse Holland is a professor of public affairs and journalist at George Washington University. He joins us now from Washington, D.C. this morning. By the way, no slouch to get into GW. Jesse, what do you make of the Supreme Court's willingness to hear these cases?
Well, this is a long-term project that has been put on by conservatives to get this case in front of the Supreme Court. It's been about 40 years since the Supreme Court made its decision allowing schools to use affirmative action to get students into their population that weren't historically allowed into their populations. Schools themselves have said, we want more minorities in our school systems. But white conservatives have for years been attempting to push the Supreme Court to say that this is discrimination. And finally, now that they have a conservative-heavy Supreme Court, they're ready to bring this case forward and hoping that this court, with its current composition, will change what our previous Supreme Courts have said.
So that being said, it is a 40-year battle. This ain't your father's Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Purdue or Alabama or Mississippi for that matter. So what good will it do for the Supreme Court to get involved now?
Well, once again, this is one of those cases that conservatives have been pushing for a long time because they don't want more minorities on these campuses. The case is actually engineered by this man named Edward Bloom who is the exact same person who engineered the Shelby v. Holder case that weakened the Voting Rights Act in America. This is something they've been waiting on. Just like they've been waiting on the Supreme Court to attempt to overturn Roe v. Wade, they've been waiting on a Supreme Court that will go back and try to make it harder for minorities to get into these schools, which in these arguments, they consistently forget. In our history, African Americans and other minorities have been discriminated against when it comes to getting into schools like Harvard and Yale. And those schools themselves have said, our campuses are better with these students on it, but conservatives want to go back into the way it used to be, where it's legacies and who has the most money to get into these elite schools.
So Harvard and the University of North Carolina, UNC, at the center of this controversy. What is it about the admission practices at these two schools that have them under the microscope?
Well, it's a stalking horse being used by conservatives to bring these cases to the Supreme Court. What they're claiming is that Asian Americans are being discriminated against by the admissions practices at Harvard and UNC. That's not really what they're concerned about. They're concerned about what they call white students not getting these spots. But what they're using is Asian American students, claiming that they're being held to a higher standard than African American, Hispanic American, and other minorities. So that's what you'll hear the case being argued around, are Asian Americans being treated fairly at Harvard and North Carolina. In reality, what this is about is they want to get rid of the use of race to balance the populations of these schools who have historically discriminated against African American and other minorities.
Somehow I don't think the University of Alabama or UNC will decide that it wants fewer African Americans on either their football or basketball teams, but that is a story for a different day. There are a lot of studies out there that show that diversity in higher education actually promotes learning, better learning outcomes, and better prepares students for the real world. Universities make this argument. I have been on the front lines of integrating institutions. They fared better than blacks.
That's right. I mean, even the U.S. military, which we know people revere in the conservative side, has said that our units are better when they are integrated, when we have a balance of everyone who looks like America. And universities are saying the exact same thing. This case is, once again, is a long-term effort by conservatives to get rid of some of the gains that we've seen in universities and colleges around America, getting more minorities on campus. They think they finally have a Supreme Court that's going to do what they think is correct. And so now we just have to wait to see what this Supreme Court does. Will they stand with the universities who say their campuses are better with these minorities on it, or will they eliminate these programs and go back possibly to the way it was 50 years ago?
Jesse, when I was a young man, I used to think that I knew the answers to a lot of things, and my father would laugh at me and then say, okay, what you going to do now? We just had the March on Washington on both sides of the abortion debate. It now appears that Roe v. Wade is going to be over. This affirmative action study is now dealing with something that 40 years ago looked a lot different than it does today. What are these conservative groups going to do now that they've won? I mean, they're the ones now that are going to have to deal with the real world consequences of abortion, and they're the ones that will have to deal with the real world consequences of a world that may not have affirmative action.
I don't think they're even concerned about that, Dell. I think they're looking at these things as things they owe their supporters. They told them for years, if we are in charge, we're going to get rid of Roe v. Wade. If we are in charge, we're going to get rid of the protections African Americans gained during the Civil Rights era. If we are in charge, we're going to get rid of affirmative action in colleges and universities. Now that they're in charge in the Supreme Court, they're moving forward with the things that they said that they were going to do. Once again, if these are programs you care about, this is why it's important to vote. This is why it's important to vote not only for president, but for your senators, for your House members, for your governors, for your state and local leaders. Because these people don't think in terms of one election. They're looking 20 and 40 years down the road. People who care about these programs should be thinking in the same way.
Jesse, because I know you follow the courts, I know you've been following this. Clarence Thomas is under the microscope because of his wife, Jenny. and things that she has said about January 6th, wanting to get rid of Adam Kinzinger, and also Liz Cheney and the January 6th committee investigating the insurrection. People are saying that Clarence Thomas should abstain from voting on issues regarding Donald Trump and the insurrection. This is actually gathering legs in Washington.
Well, I will tell you, Dale, the one thing that we don't want to do is start judging people by whom they're married to. Now, if you judge me by my wife, I'd be a millionaire. Everyone would love me because my wife is so much better than me. But we can't judge people based on who they're married to. Now, if Clarence Thomas himself has said or done anything that brings in question of whether he can be objective or not, then we can have that conversation. But as long as it's someone in his house and not him, I don't know where we can say just because his wife has done some of these things that Clarence Thomas himself should be banned from making these decisions. We can't judge people based on who they're
Jesse,
married.
the vote to release the documents from the National Archives was 8-1. Who was the one vote? I'll let you name it.
Of course, Clarence Thomas.
And that being said, people are saying that Clarence Thomas has a conflict. Should justices be forced to recuse themselves if they have a conflict?
If he has a conflict, 100%, he should be recused from the bench. However, as long as it's just his wife, we can't judge him based on who his wife is. In fact, I think I feel safe in saying that regardless of who he was married to, Clarence Thomas would have voted the exact same way.
I love having you on the show because we get to have these debates. Jesse Holland is a professor of public affairs at GW, and I'm sure you're having the same debate in your classroom right now. Jesse, as always, thanks for being with us.